But Eros always laughed at such revilers. They were always his greatest favourites. There is, of course, here and there on this terrestrial sphere, a kind of sequel to love, in which that covetous longing of two persons for one another has yielded to a new desire and covetousness, to a common, higher thirst for a superior ideal standing above them. But who knows this love? Who has experienced it? Its right name is friendship. 15. Out of the distance. This mountain makes the whole district which it dominates charming in every way and full of significance. After we have said this to ourselves for the 100th time, we are so irrationally and so gratefully disposed towards it, as a giver of this charm, that we fancy it must itself be the most charming thing in the district, and so we climb it and are undeceived. All of a sudden it itself and the whole landscape around and under us is, as it were, disenchanted. We had forgotten that many a greatness, like many a goodness, want only to be seen at a certain distance, and entirely from below, not from above. It is thus only that it operates. Perhaps you know men in your neighbourhood who can only look at themselves from a certain distance to find themselves at all endurable or attractive and enlivening. They are to be dissuaded from self-knowledge. 16. Across the plank. One must be able to dissimulate in intercourse with persons who are ashamed of their feelings. They experience a sudden aversion towards anyone who surprises them in a state of tender or enthusiastic and high-running feeling, as if he had seen their secrets. If one wants to be kind to them in such moments, one should make them laugh, or say some kind of cold, playful wickedness. Their feelings thereby congeals, and they are again self-possessed. But I give the moral before the story. We were once on a time so near one another in the course of our lives that nothing more seemed to hinder our friendship and fraternity, and there was merely a small plank between us. While you were just about to step on it, I asked you, quote, "Did you want to come across the plank to me?" end quote. But then you did not want to come any longer, and when I again entreated, you were silent. Since then mountains and torrents, and whatever separates and alienates, has interposed between us. And even if we wanted to come to one another, we could no longer do so. When, however, you now remember that small plank, you have no longer words, but merely sobs and amazement. 17. Motivation of poverty. We cannot, to be sure, by any artifice make a rich and richly flowing virtue out of a poor one, but we can gracefully enough reinterpret its poverty into necessity, so that its aspect no longer gives pain to us, and we do not make any reproachful faces at fate on account of it. It is thus that the wise gardener does, who puts the tiny streamlet of his garden into the arms of the fountain nymph, and thus motivates the poverty. And who would not like him need the nymphs? 18. Ancient pride. The ancient saviour of nobility is lacking in us, because the ancient slave is lacking in our sentiment. A Greek of noble descent found such immense intermediate stages, and such a distance betwixt his elevation and that ultimate baseness, that he could hardly even see the slave plainly. Even Plato no longer saw him entirely. It is otherwise with us, accustomed as we are to the doctrine of the equality of man, although not the equality itself. A being who has not the free disposal of himself and has not got leisure, that is not regarded by us as anything contemptible. There is perhaps too much of this kind of slavishness in each of us, in accordance with the conditions of our social order and activity, which are fundamentally different from those of the ancients. The Greek philosopher went through life with the secret feeling that there were many more slaves than people supposed, that is to say, that every one was a slave who was not a philosopher. His pride was puffed up when he considered that even the mightiest of the earth were thus to be looked upon as slaves. This pride is also unfamiliar to us, and impossible. The word "slave" has not its full force for us even in simile. 19. Evil. Test the life of the best and most productive men and nations, and ask yourself whether a tree which is to grow proudly heavenward can dispense with bad weather and tempests, whether disfavour and opposition from without, whether every kind of hatred, jealousy, stubbornness, distrust, severity, greed, and violence do not belong to the favouring circumstances, without which a great growth even in virtue is hardly possible. The poison by which the weaker nature is destroyed is strengthening to the strong individual, and he does not call it poison. 20. Dignity of folly. Several millenniums further on the path of the last century, and in everything that man does the highest prudence will be exhibited, but just thereby prudence will have lost all its dignity. It will then, sure enough, be necessary to be prudent, but it will also be so unusual and common that a more fastidious taste will feel this necessity as vulgarity. And just as a tyranny of truth and science would be in a position to raise the value of falsehood, a tyranny of prudence could force into prominence a new species of nobleness. To be noble, that might then mean, perhaps, to be capable of follies. 21. To the teachers of unselfishness. The virtues of a man are called good, not in respect of the results that they have for himself, but in respect of the results which we expect therefrom for ourselves and for society. We have all along had very little unselfishness, very little "non-egotism" in our praise of the virtues. For otherwise it could not but have been seen that the virtues such as diligence, obedience, chastity, piety, justice are mostly injurious to their possessors, as impulses which rule in them too vehemently and ardently, and do not want to be kept in co-ordination with the other impulses by the reason. If you have a virtue, an actual perfect virtue and not merely a kind of impulse towards a virtue you are its victim. But your neighbour praises your virtue precisely on that account. One praises the diligent man, though he injures his sight, or the originality and freshness of his spirit, by his diligence. The youth is honoured and regretted who has "worn himself out by work," because one passes the judgment that "for society as a whole the loss of the best individual is only a small sacrifice, a pity that this sacrifice should be necessary, a much greater pity, it is true, that the individual should think differently, and regard his preservation and development as more important than his work in the service of society." And so one regrets this youth, not on his own account, but because a devoted instrument, regardless of self, a so-called "good man," has been lost to society by his death. Perhaps one further considers the question whether it would not have been